Okay, guys, let's continue with part 2 of the U.S. History Final Exam Review. So we last left off at the Cuban Missile Crisis. We'll pick up at NATO. And NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And SEATO is Southeast Asian, so I'm just going to Southeast Asian treaty organization. And so pretty much NATO and SEATO, these two organizations in the Cold War were meant as a defense alliance. All right, in the case of a Cold War attack, you know, countries would pretty much be the alliance system. So would ally with each other in protection. So you can put alliance system either way. So kind of remember that World War One mentality of, you know, if you fight, if someone attacks you, I'm going to fight for you and help protect. Warsaw Pact was the Soviet Union version of that. All right, Soviet Union or communist alliance. Okay, so that was the opposite side or the enemy. Okay, next we go down to this is a Cold War on the home front effect. We have the House Un-American Activities Committee, and this committee's job was to pretty much help in the Red Scare #2, right? Volume #2 for the Red Scare. And search out for socialists in the United States or, you know, communists, anarchists. Not question mark, sorry. Anarchist. Okay, anyone that may be attempting to promote anti-democracy, democratic beliefs. Okay, McCarthyism was actually was another way that you know, the court cases, you know, where they brought, you know, investigations of celebrities, celebrity and major government officials, okay, who were suspected of being communist and trying to use their power to persuade others to shift to communism. And so some famous people, you know, to remember here are like the Rosenbergs, who were actually executed for leaking information out about the atomic bomb. You also have the Hollywood 10, which was a famous list of actors and actresses who were also fired from their job and believed to have been promoting communism within movies and, you know, cinema. Okay. All right. And so all of this is occurring in the Cold War sector. And then we see the shift into a counterculture. So before you get to the counterculture, you have to understand like the life in the 50s, 50s and 60s. Okay, this was the period of your baby boomers. The baby boomers after World War II. And we also, you know, saw in the 50s and 60s a return to, you know, family-centered, you know, lifestyle, you know, in the suburbs, you know, suburb living. Okay. But then we see by the late 60s and into the 70s, um, so by the late 1960s through the 70s, we see these baby boomers and their kids shifting their family traditional centered lifestyles to this counterculture, anti-war, pro peace, don't want to get involved in foreign issues, and very non-traditional lifestyles. And very non-traditional lifestyles. So Woodstock was a cultural event and music movement of we have eclectic rock and roll, classic rock and roll will play a part, of course Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles in the 60s. Beatles will be the British invasion, okay? And what the British invasion truly encompassed was, this idea of, rock and roll. And, I mean, you could just see the frenzy if you ever get a chance, go on YouTube or Google or somewhere and actually search Beatle concerts. Just watch them. I mean, it's pretty crazy. I mean, girls would literally melt in seeing these guys, and they were big icons. They were not from the United States, but it was this new fad with rock and roll and music. Okay, so then we have Brown versus Board, and this is crucial because it's going to overturn, or they're going to look back at a previous court case. It's going to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. Okay, meaning that now we are saying that separate is inherently not equal. And so basically striking down segregation. Okay. So things that so this is in 1954. It will ultimately, it will really kickstart civil rights civil right movement throughout most of the areas that were segregated. But as we know, we talked about in class, even though this law comes out in 54, doesn't mean that southern states will all just jump on the bandwagon. And as we know, schools will stretch it out, for 15 years up right till 1969. Okay. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 65 were ways to get around um, the sort of Jim Crow laws of the South. So get around, poll taxing and um, and literacy test. It also dispelled the idea of the grandfather clause, like if your grandfather could vote, then you could vote. But by this time, the grandfather clause is not as prominent because most of African Americans or whoever, their grandfather did get to vote at this point. So people get around the poll tax and the literacy test, because the government creates these things as illegal by this point, and also requiring by law desegregation of businesses. Now, you may or may not see this on the exam, but I want to throw it out there as far as civil rights goes. We have a court case of it's the Heart of Atlanta, all right, Supreme Court case. And this was an example of like a hotel who could not discriminate, on race of their customers. Okay, so you could possibly see excerpts from things like these court cases. All right, two major figures in the civil rights movement. We have Martin Luther King Jr., MLK, who believed in, civil disobedience. Okay, and what that, of course, what that means is when you feel a law is not just by your government, you inherently do not follow it in a way to make change. Okay, and that was MLK. Just march, do marches and sit-ins. And as we saw in the picture, like the young man and lady sitting at the bar at the soda shop with ice cream and such being poured onto them, do not respond violently because you just want your, you know, silent voice to be heard. And then we have MLK, Malcolm X on the other side, have had the same, concept of, we need to stand up for our rights and push forward. But if violence was needed, you just do what is necessary. Okay, mentality. Okay, so you verbalize, um, show show your action. Okay, is truly it. Put into action what you want. Okay. Also, during the period of the 60s and 70s, we see major movements happen. One major rights movement was in the women's sector, Roe v. Wade. This was a campaign to legalize abortion, and it was passed, causing a huge wave of controversy, especially between liberals and conservatives. Okay, uh, conservatives, excuse me. All right, so legalizing abortion and really just causing the concept and the debate, over women having the right over their own choices versus, the other side believing that it is inhumane. Okay, but pretty much it all links back to this idea of women's rights. Okay, we often think women's rights and think of voting. Okay, and not fully thinking about the other aspects, equal pay and so forth. American Indian movement refers to the idea of recognizing Native American culture in the United States. At this point, they're not all null and void, and you still have many reservations around the country. It's just that many of their rights, or they have been pushed to the bottom of, the list to be recognized, and so we see this again continual movement. For a while it seemed kind of like it was underground, but pretty much since like Battle of Bull Run and that period, Native American culture had not died off. It just sort of doesn't get the spotlight all the time. Then you have Cesar Chavez. This Cesar Chavez was for uh, Latino rights, Hispanic movement out of California, uh, and for migrant workers. Okay, and pursued the boycott, of grapes throughout the country, because Hispanic migrant workers helped plant those, and he wanted better rights and freedoms. Okay, so this is going to end part 2, and I will see you next for part 3.